We begin with some breaking news from Ukraine, where a missile has struck a convoy of vehicles, killing dozens of civilians in Zaporizhia. The destroyed cars and vans were packed with travelers. The regional governor said at least 23 civilians are dead, with more wounded. Both Ukrainian and Russian officials have blamed each other for the attack. It took place in the Ukrainian-held part of the region of Zaporizhia. Well, the region is also partly under Russian occupation and is one of the areas expected to be illegally annexed by Moscow today. Nick Connolly is in Kiev. Nick, what more can you tell us about this attack on that convoy in Zaporizhia?
Well, we've just been hearing from the authorities there that the number of wounded has risen to 50. It was previously thought to be just under 30. I think the important thing to bear in mind here is that this was basically a crossing point between Ukrainian-held territory in Zaporizhia and the Russian-occupied part of Zaporizhia. The people in those cars that we've seen on pretty gruesome images on social media, it is believed, were heading to occupied territory to pick up relatives and friends and to bring them back to Ukrainian-controlled territory. Also some humanitarian aid there. From what you can see on the pictures, there's a sense that lots of these wounds and injuries will have been through shrapnel, through bits of broken glass. The cars that are seen on the pictures are not destroyed for the most part, but are just full of holes, windows all blown out. So very, very distressing images coming out of there. The Ukrainian authorities also saying that Russia launched a total of 16 missiles, which is really unusual in that concentration. Missiles which the Ukrainians say were actually Russian anti-aircraft, anti-missile systems. So a sense there that Russia is running out of modern weapons, running out of modern missiles, and is using these kinds of systems to attack targets on land. So a sense there that Russia is also running out of options.
It's indeed horrific, that attack, and it comes as Russia is about to illegally annex 4 regions of Ukraine, including Zaporizhia. What are the implications of these annexations for the war in Ukraine, Nick?
Well, definitely we've been seeing the Russians using this as a pretext for greater threats, for escalating threats, saying that now this is all core Russian territory. We will use nuclear weapons to defend our core territory. Obviously, we don't know yet if that is bluff or not. So far, US intelligence hasn't seen any indication that the Russians are bringing out their nuclear weapons from storage. And definitely the Ukrainians are not taking this seriously for now. But there have been voices from Western Europe particularly saying that it's important to take this seriously and to act accordingly. And that has prompted fears here in Ukraine that there will be pressure put on Kiev to somehow come to some kind of deal, that Russia's escalation will be rewarded with pressure on Ukraine to do more of what Russia wants from it.
Now, as mentioned, Russia is preparing to formally annex up to 15% of Ukrainian territory. It's the biggest illegal land grab Europe has seen since the Second World War. The UN Secretary General says the move will have no legal standing and marks a dangerous escalation in the war. U.S. President Joe Biden has joined other world leaders in rejecting Moscow's attempt to redraw international borders.
The United States, I want to be very clear about this, the United States will never recognize Russia's claims on Ukraine's sovereign territory. This so-called referendum was a sham, an absolute sham. The results were manufactured in Moscow. The true will of the Ukrainian people is evident every day as they sacrifice their lives to save their people and maintain the independence of their country.
Nick, these announced annexations expected today have drawn international condemnation, as we just saw. What does Russia have to gain from them?
Well, I think this is definitely a sign of weakness, a sign that Vladimir Putin needs something to show for 7 months of war to his own domestic audience in Russia. You know, if you think back to the beginning of the war, there was all this talk of denazifying, whatever that means, and demilitarizing Ukraine, of taking Kiev in the space of 3 days. None of that has proved possible. Indeed, with the exception of Kherson and Mariupol, Russia hasn't taken any big Ukrainian cities. And now there's the need to justify the huge losses that Russia has faced in terms of soldiers' lives lost, but also diplomatic isolation, economic impact, and that by bringing these territories into the fold of Russia, they can at least say that Russia is growing, Russia is pushing its borders forward and keeping, as they would see it, NATO further away from Russia's core territory and from Russia's capital.
Meanwhile, Nick, the war in Ukraine does rage on. What's the latest from the battlefield?
Well, that's the extraordinary thing, as Vladimir Putin is set to have this big event in Moscow, signing these treaties that would, bring these regions under Russian control, and we're expecting a big speech from him later on. On the same day, we're getting increasing reports of what looks to be a very significant Russian defeat in the offing near the city of Liman. That is in the northwestern part of Donbass, not far from Severodonetsk, the city that Russia took at huge cost to lives and military equipment in the summer, and a sense that Ukraine is really on a roll and is using that momentum that it has had since taking lots of the Kharkiv region in the last few weeks to push Russia back. Russia not able to bring in those newly mobilized people at the speed and the scale needed, and a sense that now Ukraine has basically given up on any kind of negotiated settlement after this plan for this illegal annexation was discussed, and is now trying to basically create facts on the ground with military force.
Nick, thank you very much. As always, our correspondent Nick Connolly there in Kiev.